lot of the times, there are challenges in mid or senior management, or there's some concern, right? So what have you found out in working with so many teams? Why do these concerns or resistance, what are some of the roots of that?
Oh, sure. Well, so it all, a lot of it really boils down to the idea that senior managers really want, and it's not just senior managers, often it's a senior architect, often it's a developer who's just in control of an important part of the project.
Okay.
They really adhere to this command and control mindset where they don't, instead of trusting the team to get things done, they really want to really manage how the project's going to be done. They want to say, we're going to do this step and then this step and then this step and this does. They want a complete roadmap down to a very micro level of exactly how the software project's going to go. And then they want to be able, that gives them a sense of control. And there's and the thing is, when you talk about agile teams, there's a balance. There's kind of a the yin and yang here. There's command and control, and then there's self-organization. Agile teams work best as self-organizing teams. And when most people talk about self-organization, one of the classic examples of how teams self-organize is on a Scrum team. When a project manager will have so if you've got even if a project manager is called, they have the title Scrum Master, if they still have that classic command and control project management approach,
right,
where they own the plan and they've planned it out and it's their job to make sure that everybody sticks to the plan.
Yeah.
What they'll find is they'll have a daily Scrum or a daily stand-up where everybody's, we're in that meeting. They'll go to the first person on the team and say, okay, what have you done on the project since the last time we met? Okay, well, here are your next assignments. And now what roadblocks can I clear up for you? And they'll go to the next project person. What have you done? When this person says, what have you done on the project? What they're really saying is, what have you done for my plan? What have you done when you've done for the assignments that I gave you? So a classic way to turn this into to help this team become more self-organizing is instead of the project manager acting as Scrum Master asking these questions, instead of assigning the work to the individual people, they leave all the work unassigned. And at that daily Scrum meeting, each person says, here's what I've done since the last time, and here's what I'm going to be doing next. And they assign themselves the next work. And so let's say you've got a two week sprint. Well, you've probably spent between half a day to a day, probably about half a day at the beginning of the sprint doing sprint planning, right? And where you've taken the work, if you're using user stories, you've selected the stories that you think are going to fit into the sprint, and then you've decomposed just enough of them into tasks so that you can get started in the first couple days of work. Well, instead of the command and control project manager will then insist on writing somebody's name on each one of those tasks. Say, well, you're going to do this task and you're going to do this task. So they can know over this next 2 weeks of work, they know exactly who's doing what when. They're going to want to order everything.
Yeah.
A more self-organizing team will take those tasks and basically put them in a pile. And everybody knows what they are. And each person will say, okay, I'm going to do this one next. And usually that works out just fine. And the reason you have these daily meetings is it's the intention of these daily meetings is to actually figure out, look at what's happening, and making sure the entire team's on board. And from a technical perspective, you want to do from a technical software engineering perspective, those daily Scrum meetings implement an inspection visibility adaptation cycle, where it's an inspection meeting where what you're doing is you're actually inspecting the plan. That's a classic software engineering inspection meeting that, where the idea of inspection dates back to the 60s. And so this is, what you'll see is most of the time people will self-assign themselves work and everything will be fine. Occasionally someone will say, I'll do this next. And somebody else will say, well, you know what? maybe if you do this other thing first, because I know that I'm going to be working on this other piece. And if you wait for me to be done, you'll be able to reuse some of the code I've written for that.
Right.
That's the inspection working. And that's the kind of adjustment that you can't do if you have a complete, or it's very difficult to do, because if you have a command and control approach rather than a self-organizing approach, where then you actually have to go back and rework the whole plan because there's all sorts of dependencies that'll cascade.
Right.
And it's a difference, not just in approach, command and control versus self-organizing, but it's a different in mindset. Just in case versus just in time. Just in time planning is much more effective than just in case planning. Planning only the amount of work you absolutely need to do and no more. And it's the same just in time attitude. Write only the documentation you need and no more. Do only the testing you need and no more. Which doesn't mean don't test. It means test really, really well, but don't spend all your time planning out your testing. Actually go and build some effective tests. Don't over-architect. Don't spend a ton of time up. It doesn't mean don't do any architecture. Some of the best Agile teams do a lot of architecture planning because they need it. But don't over-plan. Leave things, leave a lot of things, leave as much as you can up to the implementation. It all comes down to this principle of last responsible moment. Make all decisions, whether it's about planning, architecture, testing, documentation, design, at the last responsible moment. So don't wait until it's irresponsible, but if if you can responsibly put off that decision, do it, because then that means you've decided to make that decision later when you have more data available and you'll make a better decision.
Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. We will sure to come back with more exciting videos on Agile topics.